January 17, 1991, 3 a.m. over the Iraqi desert. The first night of Operation Desert Storm, and the sky is more crowded than any sky in the history of air warfare. 700 coalition aircraft are pouring across the border in carefully choreographed waves. Stealth fighters over Baghdad, Tomahawks tracking along highways, tankers stacked in orbits, and strike packages stretching beyond the horizon, all protected by the most advanced air superiority fighter ever built, the F-15 Eagle, undefeated in combat, holder of a perfect score that no fighter in history has ever matched. Somewhere in that darkness, climbing alone out of Qadisiyah Air Base, is a machine from another era. A Soviet-built MiG-25 Foxbat, an interceptor designed with slide rules in the early 1960s, made of welded steel and vacuum tubes. The West once feared it as a super fighter, then laughed at it when the truth came out. You've heard that whole story if you watched our MiG-25 film. By 1991, it is a museum piece with afterburners, a quarter-century old, flown by an air force about to be annihilated. In its cockpit sits Lieutenant Zuhair Dawood of the Iraqi Air Force's 84th Squadron. His ground controller steers him through the chaos, threading him past the F-15 escort screens, and brings him in behind a formation of American aircraft returning from a strike. On his ancient radar scope, a blip. Dawood locks it, closes at supersonic speed, and at 38 kilometers, fires a single enormous R-40 missile, a weapon nearly the size of a telephone pole, designed 30 years earlier to kill American bombers that were never built. Ahead of him, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Michael Scott Speicher is flying his F-18 Hornet home from the war's opening strike. He never sees it coming. The missile strikes, and Speicher's Hornet goes down in the desert. He is the first American lost in Desert Storm and in the entire 6-week air war against the largest and most sophisticated air armada ever assembled. His aircraft will be the only coalition fixed-wing loss in air-to-air combat. Scored by the obsolete jet, the Stone Age monster. The plane, the F-15, was specifically, explicitly created to destroy. And that is what makes this story irresistible. Because the F-15 Eagle exists for one reason, the MiG-25. American engineers designed it in the early 1970s against the Foxbats' inflated legend, gave it everything, the biggest radar, the most thrust, the best missiles, precisely so that no MiG-25 could ever do what Zuhair Dawood did that January night. These two aircraft are not just rivals, they are cause and effect. Creator and creation, hunter, and the reason the hunter was born. Over 20 years, from the skies of Lebanon to the deserts of Iraq, the purpose-built killer and its intended prey actually met, again and again. Ambushes, chases, missiles exchanged in the dark, and one bizarre final duel involving a robot. This is what really happened when the MiG-25 fought the F-15. To appreciate how strange this rivalry is, you have to remember that the F-15 was designed to fight an aircraft that didn't exist, and the aircraft that did exist was never meant to fight the F-15. Quick recap for anyone who missed our earlier films. In 1967, the Soviet Union unveiled the MiG-25, enormous, twin-tailed, and faster than anything NATO had ever tracked. Western intelligence, seeing its huge wings and record-breaking speed, concluded the Soviets had built a superfighter that could outfly and outfight anything in the American inventory. The panic was genuine. The U.S. Air Force, still bleeding in Vietnam against nimble little MiG-21s, faced the prospect of a Soviet aircraft that was faster than everything, and apparently agile too. The answer was the FX program, which became the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle, and the Foxbats' fingerprints are on every part of it. Mach 2.5 top speed because the Foxbat was fast. A thrust-to-weight ratio above 1, unprecedented, letting it accelerate straight up because the Foxbat climbed like a rocket. A radar dish nearly a meter across because the Foxbat's radar was huge. Not one but two engines, 4 Sparrow missiles, 4 Sidewinders, a gun, and, courtesy of Vietnam's lessons, agility, a wing so large and loading so light that the Eagle could outturn nearly everything flying. It first flew in 1972, the most expensive, most capable fighter ever built, sized against a ghost. Then, in 1976, Viktor Belenko landed his stolen Foxbat in Japan, and the ghost dissolved. The MiG-25 was an interceptor, not a fighter. Steel, not titanium, 4.5 G limits, not 9, a straight-line dart that turned, as one analyst put it, like a train. The Americans had built the greatest dogfighter in history to duel an aircraft that could not dogfight at all. You might think that settled the matter. It did not, for two reasons. First, the MiG-25 could still do the one thing the F-15 was least equipped to stop: fly very high and very fast in a straight line. An Eagle tops out around Mach 2.5 with a service ceiling near 20,000 meters, and its missiles added reach, but a Foxbat sprinting at Mach 2.8 above 21,000 meters presented an intercept problem that even the Eagle's numbers only barely closed. The Hunter had been built to kill a myth. The real animal, in its narrow specialty, remained genuinely hard to catch. And second, geography. The two aircraft were bought by neighbors who shot at each other. Israel received its first F-15s in December 1976, the Eagle's first export. Syria operated MiG-25s from 1980, and Soviet and later Iraqi Foxbats had been overflying the region since 1971. The Middle East, not the Cold War's central front, would be where the creation finally met its cause. The first meeting had actually already happened, quietly, and the F-15 had failed. Before the shooting starts, let's put these two machines side by side honestly, because the comparison is stranger than any spec sheet suggests. Speed: Foxbat decisively. The MiG-25's operational limit of Mach 2.83, with emergency dashes beyond Mach 3, simply exceeds anything the F-15 can do. The Eagle's Mach 2.5 is a clean configuration figure it rarely approaches in real life, where missiles and fuel tanks drag it down toward Mach 2. In a pure straight-line foot race, the 1960s steel dart beats the 1970s thoroughbred every time. Altitude: Foxbat again. Operational ceiling over 20,000 meters against the Eagle's 18 to 20,000, and a stripped reconnaissance Foxbat could zoom past 24,000 meters. Heights where the F-15's wings grip almost nothing and its missiles arrive exhausted. And there, the Foxbat's column of victories ends. Radar and missiles: Eagle, overwhelmingly. The F-15's pulse Doppler radar could look down and pick a target out of ground clutter, the exact capability whose absence made the Foxbat blind below itself. Its Sparrow, and later AMRAAM, missiles were guided by that radar with mid-course updates. The MiG-25's giant R-40s were faster and heavier, but guided by 1960s electronics that a competent opponent could outmaneuver or jam. Agility: not even a comparison. The Eagle sustains 9G. The Foxbat, with full tanks, is placarded at 4.5 and handles, by its own pilot's testimony, like a heavy freight vehicle. Endurance: the Eagle flies twice as far. Situational awareness: the Eagle's pilot sits under a bubble canopy with a heads-up display, and crucially, usually flew with AWACS radar planes watching the whole sky. The Foxbat pilot peers through a periscope-thin view, entirely dependent on a ground controller telling him where to go and when to be afraid. Add the human factor. Israeli and American F-15 crews of this era were among the best-trained fighter pilots in history, flying hundreds of hours a year with realistic adversary training. Syrian and Iraqi Foxbat crews flew rigid Soviet-style ground-controlled profiles, with little initiative permitted, and in Iraq's case, an air force periodically purged by its own government. So the honest summary reads like a fable: one aircraft that can only run, flown by pilots on a leash; another that can do everything except catch it, flown by the best in the world. The tactical problem for both sides reduces to a single question: can the Eagle arrange to be in front of the Foxbat, with missiles ready, before the Foxbat's speed carries it out of reach? If yes, the fight lasts seconds and only ends one way. If no, there is no fight at all. There is a contrail disappearing at Mach 2.8, and an F-15 pilot watching his missile's fuel run out far below it. Every encounter you're about to see, over Lebanon, over Israel, over Iraq, is that one question asked with live ammunition. And the first time it was asked, over the Sinai in the late 1970s, the answer embarrassed the Eagle. Israel's relationship with the MiG-25 began as pure humiliation, and the arrival of the F-15 did not immediately end it. Through the early 1970s, as we covered in the Foxbat film, Soviet-flown MiG-25s photographed the Sinai at will, while Israeli Phantoms burned their engines out trying to reach them. The reconnaissance flights paused, then resumed under Egyptian and Syrian colors, and by the late 1970s, Foxbats were again crossing the region at 70,000 feet, this time with a new opponent waiting below. Israel had taken delivery of its first F-15s in December 1976, and the mission of catching the Foxbat was among the very reasons Israel had fought to buy them. The Eagles brought exactly the tools the Phantom lacked: a radar that could see the high flyer from far off, and the Sparrow missile with the reach to climb after it. Israeli planners built entire choreographies for the intercept, Eagles pre-positioned at altitude, accelerating to maximum speed on cue, performing a zoom climb to loft their Sparrows up into the stratosphere ahead of the crossing Foxbat. It kept almost working. Through 1977, 1978, and 1979, Israeli F-15s repeatedly locked onto reconnaissance MiG-25s crossing over or near Israeli-controlled airspace, and at least twice launched missiles. Each time the geometry fell just short. The Foxbat, warned by Syrian ground control or simply protected by sheer altitude and closing speed, swept past untouched, its camera bays full. The frustration in the Israeli Air Force was real and remembered. The world's best fighter, purchased at enormous cost partly for this exact target, was zero for several attempts. The Foxbat's narrow specialty, be too high and too fast for the intercept mathematics, was holding even against the aircraft designed around it. But every failed intercept taught the Israelis something, and by 1980 they had assembled the pieces of a solution. The problem was never the missile's energy alone, it was warning time. A Foxbat dash across Lebanon lasted a handful of minutes. Scrambling Eagles after detection guaranteed a stern chase and failure. The answer was to stop reacting. Israeli intelligence studied the Syrian reconnaissance patterns, the routes, the altitudes, the radio habits, the intervals between flights, until the next mission could be anticipated rather than detected. The Eagles would not chase the Foxbat. They would be waiting for it, already high, already fast, positioned in front of its photographed route with their radars off, invisible, guided silently by Israeli ground control until the last possible moment. In other words, to kill an interceptor, the Israelis became one. The F-15, the world's ultimate dogfighter, would score its most technically difficult kills flying the Foxbat's own mission profile, the pre-positioned, ground-vectored, single-pass ambush. All they needed was for a Syrian MiG-25 to fly the pattern one more time. On February 13, 1981, over Lebanon, one did. February 13, 1981. Over the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, a two-seat Israeli RF-4E Phantom reconnaissance jet flies a photo run, deliberately conspicuous. It is bait. Syrian radar sees it, exactly as intended, and Syrian ground control scrambles the interceptor force's pride. A MiG-25P from Damascus, tasked to kill the intruder with its giant R-40 missiles. The Foxbat climbs and accelerates east of the Phantom, which turns away, staying just ahead, drawing the Syrian jet along the ambush line. Below and ahead, hidden against the terrain clutter, where the Foxbat's vacuum tube radar cannot see, two Israeli F-15A Eagles from the 133rd Squadron are already airborne, radars silent, listening to the ground controller's quiet vectors. The lead pilot is Major Benny Zinker. As the MiG-25 sweeps in, the trap closes with textbook precision. The Eagles light their afterburners, pitch up into the climb they have rehearsed for years, and Zinker's radar locks the Foxbat from below, the look-up geometry the Syrian pilot cannot match, because his radar cannot look down. At the moment of launch, the MiG-25 is high supersonic, crossing fast. Zinker fires a single Sparrow. The missile climbs, tracking a target moving at more than twice the speed of sound, and for a long moment, the entire Israeli air defense network holds its breath, because this exact shot has failed before. Not this time. The the Sparrow strikes the Foxbat amidships. At that speed and altitude, the aircraft does not so much explode as disintegrate, shedding burning debris across kilometers of Lebanese sky. The pilot, Captain Said, does not survive. It is a moment worth pausing on. This is the first MiG-25 ever destroyed in air-to-air combat, anywhere, by anyone, 10 full years after the type became operational and untouchable over Sinai. The kill is scored by the aircraft that exists because of the Foxbat, using tactics copied from the Foxbat's own doctrine, against a pilot whose radar and training left him blind to the threat below. Cause and effect, closing the loop with a Sparrow missile. Damascus responded with silence, then denial, then quietly adjustment. The reconnaissance flights continued, but warier. The Israelis, for their part, knew the ambush would only get harder to repeat. The same trick rarely works twice against the same opponent. It worked twice. On July 29, 1981, the play ran again almost line for line. An Israeli decoy near the Lebanese coast, a Syrian MiG-25 rising to intercept, and a concealed F-15 pair, this time with Major Shaul Simon in the shooter's seat, vectored into the lookup ambush. Simon's Sparrow, followed by a second shot, caught the Foxbat in its high-speed run and blew it out of the sky. Some accounts add a grim detail: the Syrian pilot's last radio call reporting he was engaging what he believed was the reconnaissance target, seconds before the missile arrived. 2 ambushes, 2 dead Foxbats, 0 Israeli losses. The purpose-built killer had finally done the job it was born for, but the Foxbat family was about to demonstrate that this rivalry ran in both directions. Between 1981 and 1991, the duel went quiet, but both champions were busy elsewhere, and their separate decades tell you exactly who they were. The F-15 spent the 1980s building the most lopsided combat record in fighter history. In June 1982, over the same Bekaa Valley, Israeli Eagles participated in the largest jet-air battle since Korea, and the aggregate result of that campaign, dozens of Syrian MiG-21s and MiG-23s destroyed against 0 F-15 losses, settled any remaining argument about the aircraft. Saudi Eagles added Iranian Phantoms in 1984. By decade's end, the F-15's air-to-air ledger read roughly 50-0, on its way to an eventual 100+0, a perfect record no other fighter type has ever approached. The MiG-25 spent the same decade fighting the grubbier, stranger war between Iraq and Iran, and its record there is the great overlooked chapter of its life. Iraqi Foxbats flew reconnaissance over Tehran, bombed cities in high-speed runs during the War of the Cities, and remarkably hunted. Iraqi MiG-25 pilots claimed multiple air-to-air kills against Iranian aircraft, including F-5s, F-4 Phantoms, and transports. One Iraqi pilot, Colonel Mohammad Rayyan, was credited with becoming something no analyst in 1976 would have believed possible: a Foxbat ace, with multiple kills scored from the uncatchable high-fast profile, before an Iranian F-14 finally caught him in 1986. The Tomcat, with its long-range Phoenix missiles, was in fact the one aircraft in the region that consistently made the Foxbat's life dangerous. Exactly the bomber interception weapons system, ironically, that the Foxbat itself was meant to be. Iraq finished that war as the world's most experienced Foxbat operator. Veteran crews, aggressive ground controllers, and hard-won knowledge of exactly how far Western-style fighters and missiles could reach. File that fact away, because it explains January 1991. Meanwhile, the original Cold War rivalry was being retired without a shot. The Soviet Union's own Foxbats were giving way to the MiG-31 Foxhound, and American Eagles patrolling Alaska and Iceland intercepted Soviet bombers, never trading fire. The 2 aircraft built for the deciding duel of World War III, the F-15 explicitly to kill the MiG-25, ended the Cold War having met in anger exactly twice, both times via Israel, both times fatally for the Foxbat. Then, in August 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and history arranged the rematch at scale. On one side, the United States Air Force, with 120 F-15CS deployed to the Gulf, AWACS coverage of every cubic mile of sky, and a decade of unbeaten confidence. On the other, the Iraqi Air Force, battered but combat-hardened, operating around 24 MiG-25s from hardened shelters, crewed by the only pilots on Earth who had actually taken the Foxbat to war and won with it. The experts predicted a massacre in one direction. The first night delivered one in the other. Return now to the night we started with, because the Speicher shootdown deserves to be understood properly. It was not luck. It was the Foxbat's entire design philosophy working once perfectly. The coalition's opening strike on January 17, 1991 was built precisely to prevent what happened. Sweeps of F-15CS preceded and flanked the strike packages. AWACS aircraft watched every Iraqi runway. The plan assumed any interceptor that got airborne would be detected, sorted, and killed long before reaching the bombers. Against Iraq's Mirages and MiG-29s, the plan worked all night. 3 MiG-29s and 3 Mirage F-1s died before dawn, several to a single F-15 pilot without scratching the strike. The MiG-25 broke the plan by being the MiG-25. Lieutenant Zuhair Dawood scrambled from Qadisiyah in the west, and instead of climbing into the fighter sweep's kill zone, his ground controller ran him fast and clean through a seam in the coverage. Speed compressed every American decision cycle. A Foxbat at Mach 2 crosses an AWACS scope annotation faster than a controller can finish speaking it. The R-40 missile's launch range meant Dawood never needed to enter the visual fight, where an Eagle or Hornet would have dismantled him. One radar lock, one launch, one hit, and by the time the strike package understood what had happened, the Foxbat was descending toward home, untouched, faster than anything assigned to chase it. Post-war analysis added painful details. Speicher's wingmen detected the MiG, but the information flow between Navy Hornets and Air Force AWACS on that overloaded first night failed to produce a clear engagement decision in time. One American pilot had the Foxbat on radar and requested permission to fire, and the request died in the confusion. The Navy initially attributed the loss to a surface-to-air missile. Only years later did the full picture, including wreckage analysis, confirm the air-to-air kill, the only one the coalition suffered in the entire war. Speicher himself was carried for 18 years as missing, a national wound, until his remains were found in the desert in 2009 and brought home. For the Iraqi Air Force, the kill was the vindication of everything their Soviet interceptor doctrine promised. The leash-flown, ground-vectored single-pass attack executed against the best-defended airspace ever assembled. For the American fighter community, it was an intolerable asterisk on a perfect war, and the F-15 squadrons took it personally. The Eagle had been created at the cost of billions, specifically so this aircraft could never touch American aviators. On night one, it had. The hunt for Iraq's Foxbats became a priority with an edge of vendetta. And 2 nights later, the MiG-25 demonstrated that killing it would take more than motivation, in an encounter that remains one of the most humbling missile engagements in U.S. Air Force history. January 19, 1991. Day 3. 2 Iraqi MiG-25s rise to challenge a strike package, and this time the F-15 screen is ready. Multiple Eagles, AWACS direction, missiles armed, the full killing machine the first night lacked. What followed should have taken 90 seconds. Instead, American crews watched their missiles, the weapons of the world's premier air-to-air force, chase 2 20-year-old Soviet interceptors and fail. Accounts of the engagement describe a total of somewhere around 10 missiles, Sparrows and Sidewinders both, launched by F-15s against the Foxbat pair as they slashed through, turned, and ran. The MiGs used exactly the defenses their airframe offered: brute speed, altitude, and the energy to make every missile's intercept solution a stern chase against a target pulling away at Mach 2 and more. Sparrows fell away out of energy. The Foxbats crossed out of the engagement zone and recovered at their bases untouched, leaving the Eagles with empty rails and a professional insult that stung for years. Some accounts add that during the chaos, The Foxbats' own R-40 shots forced American aircraft defensive, though none connected. The U.S. Air Force is not accustomed to telling stories like this about itself, which is precisely why this one is credible. It appears in American accounts, told with gritted teeth. The lesson was the same one Israel had learned over Lebanon and Sinai. You do not chase a Foxbat, missiles fired at its tail by nothing but distance. You kill it the way Zinker and Simon killed it, from in front, from ambush, with geometry arranged before the target knows the fight has started. The Eagles adjusted. Through late January, F-15 pairs began flying dedicated Foxbat traps, and the results came quickly. On January 27th, Captain J. Denny and Captain Benjamin Powell, maneuvering against a pair of Iraqi jets fleeing toward Iran, cut off a MiG-25's escape and killed it with a face-shot geometry it could not outrun. Other Foxbats died in similar circumstances during the war and its aftermath. Caught in turns, caught climbing out of shelters, caught trying to reach Iranian sanctuary, always caught in front, never from behind. By the end of hostilities, American F-15CS had destroyed at least 2 MiG-25s in the air, with more claimed in the extended no-fly zone years that followed, including a December 1992 kill by an F-16 using the new AMRAAM missile, the first of its kind. The 1991 ledger between the two types thus closed strangely balanced in narrative if not numbers. The Foxbats scored the war's only air-to-air kill against the coalition and staged history's most embarrassing missile evasion, while the Eagles, once they stopped chasing and started ambushing, killed Foxbats without loss, as they killed everything without loss. You might assume the story ends there, with the old monster's honor intact and its fleet broken. But this rivalry had one more engagement left, the strangest air combat of the century's turn, fought between the Foxbat and an aircraft with nobody in it. Before the robot duel, one more human engagement deserves its place in the record, because Iraqi pilots still tell it as their finest hour, and untangling it teaches you how air combat history actually gets written. January 30th, 1991. Over Samurra, 2 Iraqi MiG-25s under Colonel Command rise for a planned, coordinated slash against coalition fighters, the most aggressive Foxbat operation of the war. What happened next depends on whose records you read. Iraqi accounts describe a masterful ground-controlled ambush, the Foxbats accelerating through the American screen, launching R-40s, damaging an F-15 badly enough that, they claim, it was later written off, and escaping the answering missiles at Mach 2+. American records acknowledge the engagement, acknowledge missiles passing close, but insist no Eagle was hit that day. Who's right? The honest answer. The American loss records are public, name every airframe, and show no F-15 lost or written off to air-to-air causes that day or ever. Against that stands pilot testimony from a defeated Air Force with every reason to salvage pride, but also with no reason to have invented the engagement itself, which both sides confirm. The most defensible version is this. The Iraqis flew a genuinely bold, well-executed intercept that got missiles into the air against F-15s and brought both Foxbats home through the answering fire, and the damage claim grew in the telling. Even that stripped-down version is remarkable. In a war where Iraqi jets that took off mostly died or fled, 2 museum-piece interceptors deliberately attacked the best fighter force on Earth and returned to base. The Foxbat's specialty, arrive fast, shoot long, leave faster, worked even then, even there. It was also the end. Days later, Iraq's surviving Air Force began its bizarre exodus to Iran, its enemy of the previous decade, where the fleeing aircraft were promptly confiscated. The Foxbats that stayed were bombed in their shelters or survived to fly cat and mouse in the no-fly zone years, a decade of radar locks, evaded missiles, occasional sprints that reminded everyone the old jet could still outrun anything, and losses whenever they lingered. One by one, the fleet dwindled, shot down, ground down, cannibalized for parts under sanctions. And then, in the last days before the 2003 invasion, the strangest chapter. The Foxbats that could still fly were flown to remote strips, the rest were buried. Literally, entire MiG-25s entombed in the desert sand at Al-Taqadum, wings and all, to hide them from the storm everyone knew was coming. American forces found them months later, sand pouring from their intakes, excavators exhuming the Cold War's most feared interceptor like archaeology, which by then is what it was. Between the burials and the flights to Iran, though, the Iraqi Foxbat force recorded one final combat first, on December 23, 2002, 3 months before the war. That day, a MiG-25 met an American aircraft over the southern no-fly zone, and for the second time in its life, killed an American machine in air-to-air combat. This time, nobody died, because this time, the American aircraft was a robot. By late 2002, the southern no-fly zone over Iraq had settled into a strange routine. American Predator drones droned along surveillance tracks, Iraqi jets occasionally rose to chase them, and the drones, slow, unarmed, expendable, usually just absorbed the harassment or died quietly. Then someone in the American chain of command had an idea that sounds like a bar bet: arm the Predators. The RQ-1 could carry a pair of Stinger missiles, heat seekers borrowed from shoulder-launched air defense, and if an Iraqi fighter came up to kill one, the drone could, in theory, shoot back. The Predator became history's first armed drone assigned, deliberately, to air-to-air combat, with a plan that amounted to using a robot as bait for jets. On December 23, 2002, the bait was taken by the worst possible customer. Not a Mirage or a MiG-21, but a MiG-25, rising off its desert runway with the closing speed of a rifle round against a propeller aircraft that cruises slower than highway traffic. The engagement that followed lasted seconds and was captured on the Predator's own camera, grainy footage later shown around the Pentagon. The Foxbats swept in and fired an R-40. The Predator's operators, sitting in a trailer far away, fired a Stinger back, the first air-to-air missile shot ever taken by an unmanned aircraft at a manned one. The camera shows the two missiles crossing, the Stinger, small and hopeful, curving toward the onrushing interceptor, the R-40, the size of a telephone pole, arriving first. The screen fills with the MiG's missile plume, then static. The Foxbat had scored again, history's first aerial combat between a crewed fighter and a drone, won by the crewed fighter, and won, of all things, by the oldest crewed fighter on the field. Somewhere in the afterlife of aviation, the engineers of the Mikoyan Bureau, who designed the aircraft in 1961 to kill 3,000-mile-per-hour American bombers, could add to its ledger: 2 American aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, 41 years apart in design time, one of them a machine with no pilot at all, a category of enemy its designers never imagined. But look closer at that grainy film, because the future is in it, pointed the other way. The Predator lost the duel and cost nothing. No funeral, no prisoner, no letter to a family, a fraction of the Foxbat's operating cost. Within 2 decades, its descendants, faster, stealthier, armed with real missiles, would be exactly the high-speed, uncrewed, attritable interceptors that the Alpha submarine episode of this series saw coming beneath the ocean. The MiG-25 won the first drone versus fighter battle in history. The category it defeated is the one that will bury every aircraft like it. The Foxbat's last aerial victory, in other words, was a message from the past defeating a message from the future, once on points. 3 months later the invasion came, the buried Foxbats surrendered to the excavators, and the 50-year duel between the MiG-25 and the aircraft built to kill it was finally, definitively over. Time to total the score. So after 50 years of designed enmity, what does the final scoreboard between the MiG-25 and the F-15 actually say? In direct encounters, the tally is short and stark. F-15s destroyed Foxbats in air-to-air combat at least 4 times with total certainty: 2 Syrian jets over Lebanon in 1981, 2 Iraqi jets in the 1991 war, plus contested and post-war claims that pushed the number higher. MiG-25s destroyed 0 F-15s. The Samurra damage claim remains unproven against public loss records. The Eagle's perfect record, no F-15 of any nation ever lost in air-to-air combat, stands unbroken by the Foxbat, as by everyone else. Head-to-head, the aircraft built to kill the MiG-25 did exactly that, every time it managed to get in front of one and never paid for it. But the wider ledger is stranger and more interesting. The Foxbats' kills came against everything except the Eagle, Iranian Phantoms and Tomcat-escorted formations in the 1980s, Scott Speicher's Hornet on the first night of Desert Storm, a Predator drone in 2002. Its evasions came against everyone including the Eagle. The 10-missile escape of January 1991 was inflicted on F-15s specifically, the one aircraft with no excuse. And the deepest accounting isn't in kills at all. The MiG-25, through the fear it generated between 1967 and 1976, caused the F-15, forced its funding, shaped its requirements, inflated its capabilities to the level that later made it unbeatable. Every one of the Eagle's 100-plus victims, Syrian, Iraqi, and beyond, is in some genealogical sense a casualty of the Foxbat panic. The MiG-25's most lethal weapon was always the West's imagination. Measured that way, no aircraft in history has a higher kill count. There's a personnel footnote too, almost too neat to be real. The F-15's totals were built substantially by Israeli and American pilots trained explicitly on Belenko's stolen secrets. The Foxbat's Desert Storm moment was delivered by Iraqi crews trained by Soviet instructors applying lessons from those same compromises. Viktor Belenko, the defector whose flight to Japan cracked the Foxbat myth open in 1976, lived to read about Iraqi Foxbats evading American missiles on CNN. The information war and the shooting war were the same war, fought across decades. And both champions outlived the duel into strange retirements. The Foxbat is essentially gone, retired by Russia in 2013, extinct in Iraq since the burials, a handful possibly airworthy elsewhere, its true successor, the MiG-31, still flying Russia's borders with hypersonic missiles. The Eagle refuses to die at all. Re-winged, re-radared, reborn as the F-15X, still in production more than 50 years after its first flight, still undefeated, now facing, in China's fast, high-flying, missile-armed interceptors, arguments eerily similar to the one that created it. Which leaves only the question this whole series keeps returning to, one more time, with these two locked together in history. What did the duel actually mean? When a MiG-25 fought an F-15, who really won? The scoreboard says the Eagle, and the scoreboard isn't wrong. 4 confirmed Foxbats destroyed, 0 Eagles lost, the perfect record intact. Engineering, training, and doctrine did exactly what they promise. The aircraft designed with better information, flown by better prepared pilots, inside a better system, won every decisive exchange. If you want the case for Western air power's 40-year supremacy compressed into a single rivalry, this is it. But run the film again and watch what the old monster actually did. Designed in 1961 with slide rules to kill a bomber that was never built, it was still scoring air-to-air kills in 2002 against a category of aircraft, the combat drone, that did not exist when its blueprints were drawn. It humiliated the missile inventories of 2 different decades. It delivered the only air-to-air blow suffered by the greatest air armada ever assembled, flown by a lieutenant from an air force that was otherwise being erased, guided by doctrine everyone had declared obsolete. Every fighter that ever chased it, Phantom, Eagle, Tomcat, learned the same lesson. Against a machine that refuses to fight your fight, all your advantages must be arranged in advance, or they are worthless. The Foxbat lost the rivalry, and in its narrow, stubborn specialty, never actually lost the argument. Speed, commitment, and a single pass. It did the one thing it was built to do in 3 different decades against 3 generations of opposition. And maybe that's the real meaning of the duel. The F-15 is what you get when a nation, terrified of a shadow, spends whatever it takes to build the perfect answer. The MiG-25 is what you get when engineers with half the resources and a tenth of the electronics refuse to accept that the question is unanswerable. The Eagle proved that overwhelming quality wins wars. The Foxbat proved that a design which does one thing absolutely cannot be fully defeated even by an aircraft designed to do everything. It can only be ambushed, contained, and outlived. Between those two truths sits the entire history of the Cold War, and if you look at drone swarms and hypersonic interceptors, a fair amount of the future too. The two of them rest in museums now, sometimes a single hall apart. The steel dart and the perfect hunter, cause and effect, bolted forever a few meters from each other's throats. Visitors photograph the eagle, its record printed proudly on the placard. Then they walk to the Foxbat, that vast, brutal, welded silhouette, and they always ask the same question the Pentagon asked in 1970, the question that built the eagle in the first place. What were they so afraid of? And the honest answer, the one this whole series keeps finding, is the future. Both sides were afraid of the future. They were right to be. It arrived anyway, and it outran everything faster than a Foxbat. Thanks for watching. This is the fifth film in our series on the Cold War's most extreme machines. The Concorde, MiG-25, SR-71, and Alpha submarine films are on screen now. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.